Hi, welcome to the New Voting Project. Today, we are here with Dean Preston, a member of the San Francisco Board of Supervisors representing District 5. It is really great to have you here, Dean. Like we were talking, it's been a long time in the coming. I'm not that far from the Bay Area, so thank you so much. You are the first Democratic Socialist elected member of the San Francisco Board of Supervisors in over 40 years. You're a tenants' rights attorney, and God knows we need that during this pandemic. You're leading the affordable housing advocacy here in the state of California, which, as you know, we're in an affordable housing crisis. You spent 20 years of your life doing this. So again, thank you. I'm very elated to have you on the show. Your introduction, I can't do it justice, but I'm sure this interview will.
Well, thanks for having me on. I'm excited. I know it took us, we were talking before we got going just about the calendar and demands of being in elected office, but this is the fun part. So I'm glad to be on.
Exactly. Well, yeah, no, let's get into these questions. Just for our viewers, starting off, talk about what you've done as a tenants' rights activist, lawyer, and some of your accomplishments as a supervisor. And kind of following that, I'm a senior in high school. So touch on your college experience, how that prepared you for your current responsibilities.
Sure. And let me just start by saying, I think it's amazing as a high school senior that you are doing this, launching this, and having this kind of discussions with folks around civic engagement and the importance of civic engagement. It's a lot of folks take it for granted. Yeah. And we've seen certainly in recent years with, through the Trump years and getting out of those years, just like how important it is to not take that stuff for granted, and just the ongoing fight and all the efforts to beat back all this voter suppression and things that I'm sure we'll talk about. But yeah, my background, I mean, as you mentioned, 20 years representing tenants, fighting against evictions, trying to hold big slumlords accountable. And I ran a statewide tenant rights organization, Tenants Together, right. That was really the first coalition, in many decades to try to do tenant rights work at the state level, and to unite all these folks in local tenant organizing groups and tenants unions and others fighting for rent control, fighting against evictions, fighting for repairs in their homes, fighting against housing discrimination, sort of bring them all together from all over our huge state of California. And right when I started that organization, there was actually a ballot measure. A lot of people don't remember this. I mean, it's back a while now, in 2008, but it would have abolished rent control and eviction protections in the state of California. Like all of the protections that keep so many folks in San Francisco and Los Angeles and Berkeley and Oakland, Santa Monica, like all the rent control cities, those could have all been wiped out. And the real estate industry went all in, and the organization I had just formed worked with folks all over the state to fight against that. And we beat it at the polls, and reaffirming what we know, which is that rent control, as with a lot of other policies, are really popular among voters. And if you get through all the misinformation that's out there, folks are willing to back those kind of policies. So I did that kind of work for 20 years, basically, after law school, and only more recently decided that I wanted to not just enforce all these laws and not just do all this outreach and not just organize people, but actually be in a position to be able to write some of these laws and change some of them.
And run for office, I should say. It's my one, I'm really young. I can't even vote yet. Let me put that in perspective. I'll be voting my first election next year. The one thing I tell everybody I meet who has a passion for politics: run for office, make your voice heard. So I commend you for doing that. It's one of the greater steps people have to take to see the change happen.
Yeah, and it's really important that folks do run for office, and it's often the people who think they're not going to.
Exactly, right? Exactly.
Because what I've found is there's a certain path that people have assumed you need to be on to run for office, and historically in our country, that's like folks who are, they go become corporate lawyers, they become prosecutors. And so there's sort of this pathway. They go to, these big Ivy League schools, and like somehow this assumption that like those are the folks who should be in office. And that's changed recently and changing for the better. I mean, my background is like a 20-year tenant rights attorney, running for office and bringing that experience. I got a different perspective than most people, in government. And you see the same thing happening all over the country with folks who are everything from, AOC running with, her background, and locally here in San Francisco, you see like public defenders running to be judges, and again, 10, 20 years ago, nobody was thinking, oh, a bunch of public defenders are going to become judges. It just wasn't the path. And so I think getting rid of those kind of conceptions and stereotypes and like around who's supposed to be in office, and just saying like, hey, you are an engaged person, you care about the world, you want to impact it, you should consider running for office. And it's really exciting seeing so many folks who are doing that. And you don't always win. I mean, I lost my first race. I ran in 2016.
Right.
Close race. I lost to the person who was supervisor in my district, who's now the mayor, London Breed.
London Breed.
Yeah.
Some thoughts about her later. Now I want to just quickly follow up and ask, what was the tick that made you run for office? What actually inspired you? You spent 20 years doing this job. You represented the people, the unions. Why run for office after that?
For me, this was the process was this. Basically, I get out of law school. Once I started doing tenant rights work, I'm out there mostly applying the law, right? I'm representing people in a court, trying to stop an eviction,
right,
or trying to hold someone accountable. After 7 years of that on housing work, I really wanted to be in more. I saw again and again that the folks writing the laws in Sacramento, right, like that they weren't being pressured to do the right thing. So I formed tenants together, worked with folks all over the state to push on those folks, right, to really push them to do the right thing. And what I saw and found in Sacramento was a lot of these folks have absolutely no interest in doing the right thing. Right, the fix is in. They get their money from the real estate industry. Like I would go to these offices lobbying these folks. I could have the perfect case. Like it made no difference, right? I could not get through. And I just, at a certain point, when you have that experience over and over again, you can either just kind of give up on it, or you can say, why don't we just replace these folks? Like these folks shouldn't be leading. They're honestly, and I'll just be real about it. I mean, they're industry hacks. They're just like holding power to further the interests of folks who are doing really well with the status quo. Obviously, there are exceptions. There's some great, political leaders out there. But I think the more I did this work and the more I saw people getting evicted from their homes, getting treated just horribly because they lacked political power, the more I realized that just pushing those in power to do the right thing wasn't enough, that we needed folks who are rooted in movements actually running for and winning office. And in San Francisco, it was housing, right? I mean, it's housing.
It's still housing.
It's how
exactly. It's housing in the Valley as well. It's housing actually is one of the most divisive issues I even see within progressives. We are divided.
Yeah.
But I could spend hours talking about housing. I'm sure you can too.
Well, I mean, one thing that relates though very much to, like, I know one of your big issues of focus around voting rights, that is not talked about a lot is the relationship between stable housing and the voting base, right? And one of the problems is that we have a society, where people who don't own are so vulnerable to displacement,
right?
And that the ongoing displacement and folks moving from city to city or out of one home and into another or becoming homeless impacts that voting base, right? And so the lack of housing security is so closely related to like who votes in a community. And when you set up the rules so that people don't have protections, they can be kicked out of their homes, they're not going to be the core voting base in the same way as the folks who own the property and are there for as long as they want to be there and let their political voice be heard. So it's one of the challenges of organizing and empowering renters. And one of the big things is making sure when someone moves to a new place that they register to vote and and turn out,
Right.
at every election.
Yeah, I could tell your smile. You kind of lit up when I brought when I
Yeah.
brought up housing. And let me tell you, the reason I got involved locally, much like yourself, getting into the nitty gritty. The reason I got involved, I was like 15. Right, I started attending city council meetings and board of supervisors. Is I tracked the money, like you brought up. I tracked who was paying for whose campaign, which real estate developers paying for that city council person, and then months later, after being reelected, they have a development, on the docket that's going to construct XYZ amount of luxury housing, in my city. And so I saw it as pay to play, corrupt politics. That was my entrance into the field. So I could very much relate to the fact that people in current leadership need to change. And it's those that you'd least expected, the very engaged, maybe the youth, or maybe the tenants' rights lawyer that needs to get involved. So I always bring it back to that is my start in politics. But I want to kind of switch on to the subject that you and I are here to talk about, which is voting rights. Um, what are some lessons you learned from the year 2020? It's a very broad topic. Once in a century pandemic, historic presidential elections, top to bottom. What are your thoughts on the year 2020?
Well, I think we're in a really difficult time in so many ways. I think that one of the things that's changed for better and for worse is a lot of the things that have been driving politics in this country are now out in the open. I think that the white nationalist, white supremacist movement, that Trump took from maybe out of the shadows and into, so it was just so blatant about it, has really emboldened, right, these folks who are pretty clear on voter suppression. I mean, they may talk about there's voter fraud out. I mean, they know there's not massive voter fraud, and
Right.
they all know exactly what they're doing, and it's not new. Like, the only difference is mainstream pundits now can talk about it,
Right. Right.
but
It's just public.
it's just public,
Yeah.
right? I mean, everything from the poll taxes and on through like, this has been the white supremacist project that is that has defined white America, for a hell of a long time. And yeah, what's different is that folks seem more open to talking about it, and that they've become that much more brazen in their tactics, right? So they're running around now, doing everything from recall elections to challenging,
Right.
legitimate votes that are cast. Like, the open disdain for the electoral process because it's not yielding the results they want, right?
Right.
That's what's different now. And part of it is that I think they, the Steve Bannons and Donald Trumps and Steve Millers and these folks of the world, or of the country, they see the writing on the wall, and they know that right now in a fair election they lose. And so they're not wasting any time moving directly to really aggressive forms of voter suppression. And it is, the issue of our times, right? Like, whether we're going to have majority rule and a democratic country, or we're going to let these folks.
Are we going to pervert national elections and gubernatorial races? I mean, I was listening. Larry Elder was speculating voter fraud, right, before the election results came out. I was like, geez, what is this? It's, oh man, there's a lot of words. There's a lot of emotions that come.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
look, I mean, we've seen it with the Republicans in Congress. You see it with Mitch McConnell, with this total ends justifies the means approach. And their ends are empowering big corporations,
Yeah.
and taking voting power away from people of color,
And keeping their majority in the process.
that's right, and keeping control, or enough, as McConnell's shown, right? You don't even need a majority, right? I mean, with the filibuster, they even in a minority position are able to block a lot of things, and you've got a Democratic Party that has been too often co-opted and unwilling to really
Yeah.
stand up to that and fight to win.
Exactly. And that old, even within the Democratic Party, because there are those old, kind of very establishment institutional figures that are not willing to budge on their decision making. We see that in the infrastructure bill and reconciliation happening right now. But we're living in crazy times, and we were last year, we will this year, and the midterms are going to be crazy as well. So good luck is what I'm saying.
Yeah. Well, we got it a little better in San Francisco, at least.
Yeah.
Although we're
World's
not,
best city. I mean, come on, that's something.
yeah, I mean, it's interesting. We don't have the same form, like that Trumpism, that just blatant racism, like is less prevalent here. But it's still, we're facing some of the same dynamics. So if you look at like the campaign to recall our progressive district attorney, Chesa Boudin, like it is, and you look at the language used in that, it's not that different than the right wing, and it's funded by a lot of these same right wing interests. So we're not free of it in our more progressive San Francisco bubble. And I do think calling that out is not popular. People in San Francisco believe in San Francisco exceptionalism, believe that, these things that are happening with the right wing don't happen here because we don't vote for Trump, right? When you have a city that 90% of people are not supporting Trump, you tend to think, that a lot of people think
it doesn't apply to me.
It doesn't apply, and it does. And if you look at how some of the more conservative San Franciscans, many of whom identify as Democrats, talk about homeless people, talk about criminal defendants, talk about those who are trying to change racist systems within our city, sometimes doesn't feel that different or exceptional.
Yeah, no. Like I say to most folks, national politics, it's always in the mainstream media. You're always going to hear about it. It's what defines us as Americans, right? Is our national figures. But local politics, regional scenes where your roads need to be built, or that light post needs to be fixed, or the traffic needs to work and it's not too congested, and housing is readily available, and our criminal justice system is actually justly acting on part. That all happens at the local level. I mean, that all happens when you vote for your mayor or your district attorney like Chesa Boudin, or in a recall election by the conservative right wing. That all happens because you vote top to bottom. It's not either or. It's not a silver bullet. It's top to bottom. You need to be there. And if you're not involved, or if you want to be involved, please say something. I'd happily connect you with the supervisor in San Francisco.
Yeah, got to do it. Got to get involved. Get involved in campaigns that move you, but also just like when folks are at voting age, right? Like making sure. Not just generally to vote. I think there's a lot of messages that say vote, but it's also being a voter that votes in every election.
Yes,
not just because what happened. So I ran in my first or my second race. First race I lost 2016.
Right.
It was kind of a long shot race, surprisingly close, but it lost that one. I ran again when the seat became open in 2019 in a special election. Very low turnout, right? Off year, nothing going on, low turnout. And then I had to run immediately after the next year, 2020 for re-election. That was a super high turnout one, right? Because that was a presidential election. And what you notice when you look at the numbers, right, is there's this surge of voting in the presidential years. But to your point, so much happens between the presidential races that impacts people locally. Their supervisors, their city council, their school boards, their DAs, their mayors, assembly members, state senators, all that stuff. But if the presidential race isn't on there, there's so many people who just don't vote. And what's happening with the right-wing recalls right now is they're taking advantage of that, because they know that when they do a recall election, even fewer people vote. Right? The turnout is so low.
It's a power.
That's part of their strategy.
Yeah, it's a power grab, because Republicans knew that in this off year, right before a midterm, low turnout, they could get out their folks, they could take the majority, because in a democratic state, fully blue, whether you're conservative blue, any different shade of blue, they know the state is going to remain blue in a gubernatorial race. They know that for a fact. It's just a power grab. It's to see what they can do. And on that part, actually, I read a San Francisco Chronicle article today, although I knew a little bit beforehand, that there's a special election probably happening in San Francisco's assembly district. Any thoughts on that? I do have Matt Haney coming on the show very soon.
Oh yeah. So that vacancy is now publicly announced, although it's been like the worst kept secret.
I know, worst kept secret. Even I knew. I'm like 40 miles away.
Yeah, I am a big fan of the two progressive folks running. I've worked with Matt Haney for the last year and a half, and we've been on the same side of a lot of battles at City Hall. And I've worked with David Campos and known him for many years, since he was supervisor. I worked with him on legislation to stop eviction of teachers and and he did free muni for youth and just so many things. So I've endorsed David Campos. I've known him for a long time and really glad he's running. I supported him when he ran against David Chu originally for this seat and was narrowly defeated. So hoping that he runs a strong campaign. But it's an important seat, and it's important. We were talking a little earlier just about the frustrations in Sacramento with a lot of these sort of industry linked kind of careerist politicians, and really important that the city have someone there that's going to unapologetically be fighting for people of San Francisco. And one of my political heroes and mentors was Tom Amiano, and Tom was an assembly member and just really stood out there as he'd be the one guy who, if the bill wasn't right, he'd cast a lone dissenting vote and wasn't afraid to do that, kind of like Barbara Lee on the Iraq War, and it makes a difference. And so I'm just, whether it's Haney,
20 years down the line too, who would have thought? Who would have thought?
So I've seen, certainly seen both of them, in action up close, and I think they definitely represent that part of our city really well.
I have to be nonpartisan, so I can't share an official endorsement. But no, I've known David Campos through his post at the Democratic Party. I know that he works for Chesa Boudin. So no, it's going to be an interesting race. I'll tell you that. But
I mean, he's great, and I think he also recently became vice chair of the Democratic Party, so I think has a lot of those state connections. So I've been happy to endorse him, and also in conversations with Haney, and continue working with him on a lot of things in the city.
Of course, yeah. No, I'll send this to David afterwards. Be like, you're welcome. In any case, I actually want to divert back to you. Do you have any, future plans to run for higher office? I mean, being a supervisor, I'm sure it's phenomenal.
I really don't, and I think I'm supposed to, because I get asked that all the time. I mean, it's funny, you take office and within a couple months, people
they're like, where are you going next?
Yeah, where are you going next? There's this assumption that that folks are kind of climbing that ladder. I am I'm excited to be District 5 supervisor. There's a ton of stuff to do in the district, and a lot of things that I think have been neglected for years here. So I've certainly been approached about, as these different vacancies and everything come up, and I'm really not interested. I'm just, I'm a year and a half into being an elected office, and there's a ton I want to do in the district, and being a supervisor is great. So yeah, that's where I'm staying. And if the voters have me, I got another few years in this term, and if they want me back, another 4 years after that.
Exactly. Good man. Yeah. No, enjoy it, savor it. It's a very special thing to be in elected office, representing truly yourself. Nobody's bought you out. You're clean money. That's something to keep very dear. Now I just want to close off on this last question. I ask it to everybody. What do you recommend? What is your advice to the next generation? Gen Z, they call it. Totally arbitrary, by the way. Z, I don't even know where they got that from. I'm going to be honest. It's like, oh, Gen Z. Yeah, here you go. But how do we make an impact? They're engaged youth like myself. there are very disengaged youth, there are ignorant youth, there are folks that are on, social media, there are folks who care, folks who don't, but don't know what to do. What is your advice to the graduating class, the new fleet of voters who are going to come and make the future decisions?
I think just do stuff that you love doing and go all in. I don't think there's one formula for those who want to go into politics or those who want to go into something else. I think folks, what I've seen in my too many years on the planet is like people who people make a difference in whatever they're doing. I mean, folks who are like artists and they just like go all in and they're incredible artists. Like if they are fighting for social justice, like they lend their craft and they do a mural that inspires thousands of people, right? Like there's a way to have a huge impact on our society and our politics, way beyond just the act of like voting or working on, in politics or that kind of thing. I will say for those interested in politics, I would definitely recommend getting involved in campaigns. And I know you've done this. It's just like being a volunteer on a campaign or getting a paid position on campaign team. It's this exhilarating like sprint,
Yeah.
And it's crazy and the hours are crazy, but what I've seen is the friendships that form in those intense campaigns that ends up being kind of a political family of folks who stick together and continue working on stuff for years. And a lot of those folks end up, after volunteering, then they're hired by campaigns, and they end up working either in government or campaigns. Like they're really, it's not always the clearest path, but I think just getting out there, if you're inspired by a candidate or an issue, right? These ballot measures in California, you have the opportunity. Some people don't care as much about the candidates, but they care about, like we did, last year we did this huge tax on the wealthiest folks in San Francisco to fund social housing and rent relief. Like there are people who got super excited about that and worked on that and wanted to tax the rich, right? And they weren't as moved by individual candidates. And so it's like whatever it is that you're excited about, just to like really go all in on that. And it's easier said than done, right? Because we all have all kinds of stresses and just things we need to do day to day. And sometimes it's hard to carve out that extra time to work on campaigns or just other passions. But yeah, just do what you love and do it really, really well. And there's a path, if you want it, to connecting that work you're doing and that that thing you love to the causes that you care about and that make a difference.
Yeah, no, that's sound advice. Being on campaigns, I will say, is the most invigorating thing you could do. It really is. You just keep going. There's nonstop, always work. If you ever go up to a campaigner and you say, I want to get involved, I promise you he'll give you hours and hours of work to do. There's no shortage of that. So yes, please do get involved if you will. Oh, and follow Dean Preston on Twitter. By the way, you got to follow me back. I'm always looking at your stuff. But please follow Dean on Twitter. He's always posting amazing commentary on things going around locally and nationally. And he's a great resource. Hit him up if you want. I'll link his information in the description.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
Of course. No, thank you so much for coming on the show. I do got to send you on your merry way to legislate or something like that. So thank you so much. You're always welcome back. And let us know how it works out. Take care. Still COVID. But no, do take care of yourself, Dean. Thank you so much.
All right. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Appreciate it. Take care. Peace.